Pastor Mark Buetow, and this is the Higher Things Video Catechism. In this episode, the Table of Duties to widows.
Widows? Widows is its own vocation? We've looked at parents and children and husbands and wives and workers and bosses and employers and supervisors and all these sorts of different callings or vocations, but how is widow a vocation? We have to remember, first of all, that typically women outlive men. And so that for that reason, it happens that in the church, oftentimes there are more widows, that is, women whose husbands have died, than there are widowers, which is when a husband loses his wife to death. So there typically in the church were many widows, that is, women whose husbands had passed away, and then in order to be cared for, well, they may or may not have had children who would help care for them, but also the church would help care for them. In fact, in the early church, widows were very important because not only did the church look out for them and care for them, but they were able to do many good works of service, that is, helping care for others and helping do things and do good works in the church for others. And so, because widows sort of an important category, and because in fact, all throughout the scriptures, that says that the Lord will remember the fatherless and the widow, that they have a special place in the Lord's heart because typically a widow was sort of on her own and without a whole lot of support. Not like we think of today sometimes when a person's older, they have Social Security and insurance and all these sorts of things to take care of them. But the church also is reminded that we need to take care of widows. And widows, and we might throw widowers in here too, but widows are reminded that they have a special vocation. And here's what the scriptures say about it and the table of duties that lists it. Read together. The widow who is really in need and left all alone puts her hope in God and continues night and day to pray and to ask God for help. But the widow who lives for pleasure is dead even while she lives. 1 Timothy 5:5 and 6. If you've ever noticed the older widows in the church, you notice that very often they're active in doing all sorts of things around the congregation. Perhaps they're part of the altar guild, or perhaps they're part of a quilting circle. The fact is they have opportunities to do many good works. And that's really the gist of what Paul is getting at with his statement. He's simply saying that if a widow is going to be able to devote time to the church, if she has the gift of time, since her husband has passed away, then she should use it for the good of serving her neighbor, not simply indulging her own sinful lusts and pleasures and all these sorts of things, which is actually really good advice for everybody, not just widows. And above all, she puts her hope in the Lord. Here's the widow of Nain whose son was dead. She had no husband and her only son had died, and Jesus gave her son back to her after he raised her from the dead. It's a reminder that he also has made us a part of his church. And so the widow puts her trust in the Lord and trusts him for all good things, even though she may suffer much sadness or even loneliness. But then she has in the church another family to help serve and also to take care of her. And in that sense, a godly widow becomes a very good example of faith for us. Here's the widow putting her little mite into the treasury of the temple. Even though all the rich people came and put of their abundance, Jesus says she really put in a lot because she put in basically all that she had. But she's an example of faith because her hope and her trust is in the Lord. And so she's looking for him to take care of her. And often the way that happens is that the church helps to take care of the widows, to look after them, to make sure they have what they need, to make sure that they're not lonely, to make sure that they have the love and compassion that they need, even while they may have opportunities to love and serve their neighbor in the church. And the fact that widows are mentioned in the table of duties reminds us of another important lesson we learn from the table of duties. Even if a particular vocation that's in the table of duties is not our particular vocation, it reminds us how we are to treat those who have that particular vocation. For example, parents, they teach their children what it means to be a child and how to honor their parents, but also what it means that they need to care for their parents. So it is with widows. We learn what the widows are supposed to do if you happen to be a widow or maybe a widower, but it also reminds us as the church to take care of our widows, to take care of those women who have lost their husbands, who need a family to be around them. And they may have their own family, but also their family is the church, and so we love and care for them as well. So now we're coming to the end of the table of duties, and we can sum it all up by saying, love your neighbor as yourself, and that's exactly what we'll do in our next episode as we wrap up the table of duties.
I'm Pastor Mark Buetow, and this has been another episode of the Higher Things Video Catechism.